to an actual meeting where we'll take a vote. So study session starts out with citizen comment on agenda items. We have 2 citizens out there. I didn't see you signing up, so I'm going to assume that we don't have any comments. Thank you, Ken. Ken's going to take a look. Coast is clear. Let's go ahead and move on to the city council retreat discussion. Patrick, are you the one who's going to talk to us?
Yeah, I'll start it, and maybe George could jump in too. We've had some interest from council to get a retreat scheduled for the first of the year, and a couple different topics have come up. I believe maybe a discussion about the neighborhood revitalization strategy, an update or a discussion on that, and then also a discussion and review of maybe the current city's mission, or vision and goals. We did include in your packet our current vision and goals, and which were readopted by council a couple of years ago. So it's been a couple of years since council has looked at them, and especially the new council members. So just want some direction tonight on maybe which direction you would like to go, so that we can start planning for that. And George, you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think maybe just a little bit more clarification on the part of the vision and goals, and the note here that they were reaffirmed at the last council retreat. So I would say my experience has been in the last 2 or 3 retreats, we've had a conversation about the vision and goals, but not a lengthy one. In other words, we've briefly looked at them to determine are we still in alignment with them. I think a couple years ago, maybe 3 years ago, there was a little bit of addition, perhaps wordsmithing, sustainability, and a couple of other things were added by way of a shorter discussion. I had asked kind of to within this topic to put on these visions, just to have a conversation right now about to what extent we want or should be talking about them. I know Councilwoman Hoppe brought it up. I think, or perhaps Councilmember Wooden, but last week. So it would affect kind of our scheduling, kind of the agenda, and how we would go through it if we actually needed more time to spend on these. And so I'm just trying to get a sense of, is this something that's kind of brief, somewhat like we've had in the last few sessions, or should we actually spend more time and actually kind of really dive into these things? So that would be my first request, is just kind of a discussion on that.
When you say dive in, meaning going through each point and seeing are they relevant or?
Well, I suppose, yes, and I'll let Patrick answer this more specifically, but you could just say, okay, we're going to put all these to the side and we're going to come up with whole new ones. I mean, it could be that dramatic. I'm not saying we should. It's just that these are...
Do you want to start from scratch, or right, just take what we got and see if those still fit today and amend them, or?
Fits, Gerald?
I've looked over all the goals. I think this is a very confusing document myself. I'd like to convert this into something that talks about strategy and tactics. Because the thing about what we have right now is we have nothing concrete about what we're going to do to solve these problems. We identify our goals. We don't really say anything about how we're going to accomplish those goals. And some of those goals are no longer appropriate either. And some were never things we could do. For example, there are things that are the responsibility of the school district that we really can't affect. So I think we ought to, using this as a base, we ought to sort of redo the whole thing, make it practical in terms of what we want to do and how we're going to, what specifically are we going to do to accomplish this goal. And we ought to strip out things that are just not realistic.
If I could add on to that a little bit, and that's usually the next step, Tim, in after the vision and goals are set, we usually create an action plan to put together items, more strategic items on how we're going to meet those goals. So what's presented in front of you today are the larger 30,000 foot level, and we have, as part of the strategic planning processes in the past, and then went on and developed actual specific action items. We're going to redevelop Wadsworth Corridor, or we're going to, create a town center. Those more actionable items. So I guess, there's kind of two different questions there. Do you think this current vision and goals are still right for today? You kind of said maybe not. So if not, we need to have a bigger discussion. We need to have that, and that could be a whole day long discussion on, what are your goals for the city for the next 10 years, and what's the vision for the next 20 years. And then you'd probably have to have another session to talk about action steps. So just keep that in mind. I think they're kind of two separate two processes that go together, but they're two different outcomes.
Well, I think for one thing, the existing document where we have two separate sections, one on vision and one on goals, and I think the two are actually not very clear how they differ from one another. And I would like us to be involved in developing a tactics for achieving the goals, because I am, at least am not aware of how we have tactics that are tied to specific goals in this document. I want to acknowledge, however, that we have taken steps all along the way to do a lot of these things. And so this is not criticism.
No, I understand. My point is that there was it's not included in here. We should have done that. There was because I felt those were out of date, but we did create, and I'm not sure if you were on council at that time or not, we created an action list. And at one point there were high, medium, low priorities. I think the last go around we just put them all as high priorities. We had a list of like 10 items that you wanted, as council wanted staff to work on, and that's, I apologize we didn't include that. But I'm sorry, George, you were going to say so. Larry's had his hand up.
George and then Monica.
Well, just a point of clarification on that, I think, is that we also do that on an ongoing basis. So when you look at the budget cycle, in many ways we're actually doing this on an annual basis, even if we had made some action plans previously. We're adjusting those on an annual basis with the budget. And our last week's presentation, or a couple weeks' presentation, I think, evidenced that, and it pointed to these things, and actually that's why the question came up at that time, I think. We're justifying our budget and the actions that we're taking on a tactical basis in the next year on these vision and goals. Does that all make sense? Do we have to talk about this more than we have?
Thank you. Since this would be my first retreat, along with a few others, I would like to take the time to really kind of reevaluate, kind of look at what's been implemented, what's there. If we need to tweak anything, we can. There's a couple of other, concerns or topics I'd like to discuss at the retreat. So I don't know if I need to bring those up now, or we're just getting a sense of what we want to do.
Yeah, actually, just to stay focused on this, first it's about how much time, if any, do we want to spend on the vision and goals?
Okay, for me, I'd like to take the time.
Okay. Because then I think
through it.
the other topic of what else can we discuss, what else do we need to discuss is it's very important, but somewhat separate from that issue.
Yeah, I'd like to take the time. I think that would kind of help me understand, too, what's been implemented, what has happened before me. So, thank you.
I think Larry had his hand up earlier.
Yeah, I was kind of on the same plane here as Tim, because this is almost like platitudes to me, and I would like to get down to strategy and tactics of how are we going to implement something. We can sit around all day long and say we want streets that are safe or neighborhoods that are safe, but how are we going to do it? I mean, everybody wants a safe neighborhood. There's not new news in that. And if you did have a list of things that you thought previous councils had focused on as being important, it might help us to trim the list a little bit down and then see what was done and how was it accomplished. But just putting together another vision list or spending a lot of time on that, the whole day, just leaves us at square one as far as I'm concerned. I mean, we need to bring together a shopping list, and I don't know if we do it tonight or maybe before the meeting gets scheduled, a kind of a list of things that we'd like to see how can we implement some strategies to accomplish some actual goals and get the goal reaching process started.
But it's also important, right? I think you all agree that we come to consensus on what those goals are, right? So that we know what strategies to develop. It doesn't. I just want to make sure, because that's part of the planning process, and I don't know if Larry and Tim, are you comfortable sticking with the current goals we have, but you just want to dig deeper and develop strategies to meet those goals, or do you want to have a bigger discussion and come up with different goals? Are you comfortable with those 4 goals that we have as a counselor for the next 5 years, let's say, or do you think we should maybe have a bigger discussion on that?
Well, all generations are welcome, valued, and working together is community and families. I mean, what does that mean?
Well, that's part of the vision.
That's part of the vision. So where are the goals in here that we've actually started to, you mentioned there were like 10 items that we've gone into, and I realized that we've done some work on the PED master plan and the bike master plan, but
The goals are the next section, and they're all in the document in your staff report. That was the vision. On page 8 are the 4 goals that the previous city council set for a 5-year period. Financially sound city providing exceptional service, choice of desirable neighborhoods, economically viable commercial areas, and more attractive Wheat Ridge. And then if you go further into the document, it breaks down each of those goals and explains what those mean in more detail. Again, that was what past councils put together. Like, for an example, financially sound city providing exceptional service. That means adequate revenues to support defined core services and service levels, well-maintained city infrastructure and facilities, maintained a professional city workforce dedicated to serving Wheat Ridge, reserves consistent with the defined city policy, more diverse revenue sources to support service delivery and infrastructure maintenance, and expanded city tax base through strategic investment to expand the local economy. So that's one goal, and broken down in a little bit more detail what that means. And then we went to the next step and created some action items. And the last action items that we put together were, they're in the budget book this year. Revenue enhancement was one of them. 38th Avenue was a action item at that point. I think there was some housing action items in there. I'd have to pull it up again. So there was the vision, which is one thing, but then we set goals, we defined what those goals meant, and then we worked together and defined an action plan for kind of a 2-year period. So this is what we want you staff to work on for the next 2 years to help meet these goals.
is that action plan available?
It is. You all should have received that during the orientation. I think we gave you copies of that,
Okay, I'll
but
go
we
back.
can get that again.
Because if it's more of this, it's still goals and not really
It's
topics.
not. It's not more of this. There was an actual defined action list, but again, it's 2-3 years old, so it's basically done. Most of the action items are
I'll go back and
done.
review my book, but
Yeah.
it should have been in here then.
Could you send that out, please? Because I don't
Yeah.
recall that I have that.
Yeah.
Our facilitator should be able to help us with that,
Yeah.
too. Mr. Urban wants to speak.
Thank you. Just wanted to speak to how we go through the process that we would choose to kind of go through this analysis of our vision and goals. And as we look at the goals, and specifically as it relates to the objectives, I think it would be appropriate to use 3 specific questions related to this process, and that those would be: where have we been, where are we at now, and where would we like to go as it relates to each of the objectives. And so that we can kind of get a handle on both as it relates to the action plan and as it's been put in place, and understanding sort of a pulse of the city, and understanding as it relates to the specific objectives that we've set, to understand this is where we have been, this is where we are at now, and this is where we as a council would like to move forward on these specific objectives. And then that would give us a clear path on the specific action items that would bear out as far as the strategies or tactics that you're speaking about. And then if we're not coming up with strategies or tactics in a given area, that would tell us that goal or that principle doesn't really have any fruit to bear, and then that goal or that principle isn't necessarily something that we as a council can necessarily work on as a council. Like you said, it's more of a platitude, and it's not necessarily an actionable, it's more just a feel-good thing to say, but it doesn't really give us something to work on. So I think as we use these 3 sort of steps of analyzing it and saying, because we've already identified these as our vision and goals, and if we say, this is where we've been, this is where we're at now, and this is where we'd like to go is our approach, that would give us a way to sort of both give us a checkup and as a way forward, an understanding of how we've met these objectives, and also not spend too much time trying to reinvent the wheel as well, because I don't necessarily think that we need to completely wipe the slate clean and completely start over from scratch, because I think there's some definitely good points in each of these elements, but at the same time, if there's certain elements in here that just have not been addressed, there's maybe very good reasons why they haven't been addressed, either because they're too challenging, there's not enough resources, or there's simply things that we as council or the city is not able to address, like for instance related to the school district, or it's just something the city is not able to affect change in, and there needs to be somebody else brought in to do that, whoever that may be. But I think that would be an appropriate way to address this. That would be my suggestion.
Councilmember Hoppe.
I agree with Zach that I think what I hear him saying is that we shouldn't scratch the vision and the goals, but look at the objectives underneath the goals, decide if those objectives are still the ones that we want to move forward on. Right? Okay. I didn't want to speak for you. Sorry. But, so the vision, I feel comfortable with the vision. I feel like that it is encompassing kind of what I see in Wheat Ridge. The goals, an example of one of them would be financially sound city providing exceptional service. Underneath that, there's 6 objectives. And, so then we can look at the objectives, adequate revenues to support defined core city services and service levels. So then we can look at the objectives and decide if those objectives are still relevant, if we've already reached that objective. And then from there, then we do our action items. So I personally would like to spend more time on staying with the goals and the vision that we have, but looking at the objectives a little bit more detailed and see if those need tweaking or if they need moved around. Does something need to be more important, more urgent? Can something be moved down the road a little bit? And then we can, look at the action items from there. So I think, and then along with that, I think we all kind of have hit lists of what we think we'd like to see accomplished in our community. And if we don't see it in these objectives, then I'd like to be able to have conversations around, I think this is important and maybe this should be added to the objectives. So.
Ms. Wooden.
I'd have to agree with Zach and Janice about the framework being okay with me. I agree that the framework's there. Don't want to reinvent the wheel, but maybe we need to look more at the objectives and the short-term goals that we're looking at. I also would hope that maybe not the entire, and I think that's what you're asking, not the entire retreat be spent on this, although it is a priority. So I'm wondering if before the retreat, maybe part of a study session could be spent on this so that we could do a little bit of somewhat homework as to what are our objectives and what are our lists that we want to bring forward, and maybe do a little bit of work before the retreat so that when we get to the retreat, we all know the steps that we're going to take to solidify this document. And that would give us more time in the retreat for all the other items that we need to discuss. The other retreat, I believe, was a one-day event, and I know to try to get everybody's schedules going, I don't know that we're going to be able to spend more than one day at a retreat unless we agree to that. But I don't feel that this document should take the majority of the retreat time, and that's why I'm wondering if maybe we could work on it a little bit beforehand and then make some final decisions at the retreat.
As I look at this, I see objectives, and there's this like adequate revenues to support defined core city services and service levels. Maybe even a determination, kind of what you started with, is that as well, at this end, it sounds like everybody is saying more specifics as we get down to those. Are they the correct objectives, the correct goals, as well as specifics as to how do we achieve them? Is that, am I hearing that correctly? That kind of everybody is saying that. And I think our facilitator, once again, will be very helpful. She's pretty experienced, as I understand.
Yeah, well, there's numerous facilitators out there. The one we were going to use last time, is very experienced in this, yes.
Okay, so, yeah.
And I don't want to repeat what everyone said, but I guess my other suggestion would kind of go along what Genevieve had said about the pre-work, but not necessarily as a group. But I know, like previously, we were interviewed by the facilitators, and maybe that could be some of the pre-work too.
That worked really well.
Yeah, I thought that was good too, and we all had like a set of questions. You kind of talked us through, asked questions. That was kind of helpful too.
Okay,
Can I add?
sure.
So, and to the extent, and I don't know that it has to be finished here, obviously, we've got some other planning to do, but to the extent that we fill out an agenda over a day and a half, which I think has been a day and an evening has been our recent history, we can talk about that. The neighborhood revitalization strategy, kind of discussing a possible update to the 2005 is just one suggestion. I just want to kind of put it out there. So I know there's probably a lot of other things. I think that actually is a document that's a little bit old, but actually obviously very relevant to the things that we were just talking about and worthwhile. Perhaps an effort to look at that encapsulates a lot of other things that we want to talk about. And if people tend to agree with that, we might try to shape it up on that and keep the vision and goals relatively small as we've heard here.
I think the question is how to fit the two in together.
Or if that's possible.
Yeah.
Or we should take it in steps. We don't want to rush. We want to make sure that we have a strong foundation that everybody agrees on, so that you can decide how to move forward from that. And that, I think the NRS, I think if you don't have a foundation and an agreement on kind of what the vision and goals of the city are, it might be difficult to have a significant discussion on the NRS and what the NRS means for the community.
Right.
If you're not all potentially agreeing on what you want for the community.
Right.
So I think it's very important that you all come out with some agreement on what are your long-term goals for this community, and then have more specific discussions about how to get there.
So we approach the retreat well-versed on the NRS, as well as how each of us, or each council member as well, feels about going forward based on the NRS.
Well, on the goals.
Well,
Or the-
starting
what
with
comes
the
first?
starting with the goals.
Oh, starting
I
with the
personally
goals and the
believe
vision.
you need to have some consensus on what the vision and goals are for long-term goals for the community.
Okay.
And then we can continue breaking that down and have a discussion about the NRS if you want, or have a discussion about what action items you want to see, what strategies you want to see to make those goals happen.
I think I said that because the NRS sort of encapsulates everything overall, so that's why I was thinking that was a
Yeah.
good base, but.
But there's the NRS, just as an example, the NRS has a lot of specific strategies in it.
Right.
And to do specific things. But if you don't agree with what those things are trying to achieve, we probably shouldn't be having that discussion. So, I mean, I think there needs to be some agreement on what we're trying to achieve as a community before we probably dig down into the NRS again and say, is this still what we want to be doing for the community? Do you still want to be doing these strategies?
Everybody comfortable with that?
We can start a little bit more planning and,
All right.
yeah.
How about the time frame? Can we even come close on this to discuss the time frame, whether it's Friday night through Saturday at whatever time it was, or?
Maybe some general conversation on what you're comfortable with. We've gone back and forth over the years. We've done, usually we try to get a day and a half in at least. Most facilitators say it's hard to get something done in 5-6 hours. But everybody's got busy schedules, so we understand that. The last few years, we've done a kind of a Friday late afternoon evening session, and then a Saturday, maybe a 6 to 7, 8 hour session depending on how much time everybody can sit still. And but that's what we've done in the past. But it's up to you guys. We could do several study sessions to do some pre-work, and then I think facilitator interviewing each of you is great work, and so we can build something. It doesn't have to be all 8 hours on a Saturday. It's totally up to you guys.
Larry?
I think we probably ought to discuss venue too, because I know I would be in favor of doing it here and in an informal situation, kind of like we'd set up the study tables, so that it can be televised and recorded for posterity and also for those interested citizens to see how we're doing our job and what's going on. I kind of don't like the going off to a cave idea somewhere and, you know, we just smoke our own stuff and don't keep them. I think it helps you keep in touch with the citizenry if you know they're out there. And I wish I'd had more time. This last election turned out to be so contentious and so all-consuming. I had hoped to have a poll of my district of what my people thought were hot buttons for 2017, but with everything that went on with the national elections, I didn't even try to get out there and put more election or politic information out there for them to look at, because I knew it would just go out the window, because everyone just got bothered so much with all the phone calls and stuff that came in. So I'm a little behind the curve there. But I think we need to always make sure that we're approaching this as what do we think our citizens want. And I'd like to see it televised and recorded.
Any other response on that or thoughts on it?
Well, I think it's important that it is an open meeting as it relates to being a city council meeting, and any member of the public is welcome and able to attend any meeting of the city council. So I don't know that that's any big surprise. As far as there would be any meeting of council, there would be minutes taken. So I don't know that there's any that I would be okay with that. So.
I think we've always had it an open meeting. I'm trying to think if somebody's come in before.
We had a few people a few years ago, I remember, that came, but typically we don't have too many. We usually don't. The last few years we've used the Senior Resource Center building, their conference room, just to get away from a city building a little bit, but it's always been open to the public.
There is some advantage to having it away. It's almost like changes your thinking and puts it a little bit of a different direction. It's a fresh environment. It's a combination of not only discussing, but to kind of get to know each other a little bit as well. So I think most companies they do a retreat. They do an opportunity to do some different kind of thinking. So, someone else want to throw in on that?
Well, I was just going to throw in my 2 cents. I mean, I have a tendency to agree with Larry in the fact that, you know, not everybody goes to the open meeting on a Saturday or Friday afternoon, but however, they want to know, okay, what did our council discuss? Just what was the retreat? So I have no issue with having it here or, you know, recording it so that if they want to watch it later, access it, we just make it as easy as possible. A Friday afternoon or a Saturday I'm good with. I mean, I really want to put the time into it since it's my first retreat, not knowing quite how it all works and goes. Plus, I think it's also good team building for us as far as the council. We haven't really had a one-on-one or just met as a group. So I'm in favor of doing it here, recording it. So.
Sorry, are you done? No.
Well, I'd echo what Councilman Urban said about, you know, they are open and open to the public. I would tend not to do it here, only because by the very nature we will revert into being a study session, and it's not a study session, it's a retreat. So I think we should do things here, and if we need to do some of the study session work up in advance of it, absolutely, let's do it here. Let's do it in study session format. Let's do it under the cameras. But if we're actually going to have a retreat and we're going to, you know, in a sense have the informality, not the lack of transparency, but the informality of a retreat, okay? Again, there's minutes, it's open, that's what it is, but there's an informality that's consciously a part of it in order to actually to engage in a different level of dialogue in a different manner. And if we do it here around the table that we sit at every other Monday, we're going to act like it's every other Monday, and we're going to have a study session. Not that that's a bad thing. I mean, that's not the end of the world. We would get work done, and that's not a horrible thing. But I do think concept of a retreat, at least how we've been practicing it previously, is a little bit different, and it does, to your point, try to kind of create a different space to develop relationships, to talk deeper about topics in a different way, and in many ways to kind of break the mold from either sitting up here or sitting down there in this room in the same way. Because I think I would revert more or less to how I behave or how I think at a study session with this microphone and the camera and all that other stuff. So again, I think there is use to having some study sessions as a part of this, though, so I think that would be okay.
Ms. Davis?
So I think George was actually just pretty much articulated what I was going to say. I think it is nice to, as a retreat, to go elsewhere for all the reasons George suggested. And again, my thought isn't as because it's a transparency issue, but I think if you look at any large business and those types of things, there are board of director retreats, there's, senior leadership team retreats, and it is a time that, yes, transparency, all of that would still be there, but again, I do think, we are a team working, we're a new team, you've got your storming and your norming, and you go through all of that as a new team, fairly new team. And I think that, again, if it was set up like a study session here, we would revert back to a study session. And again, I think the open meetings, the documented of what we discussed and those types of things, but I don't think it's word for word that, Christy said she was, whatever, it just kind of gives you time to be more, I guess, if in some cases, people might feel more comfortable, be more vulnerable, or expressing things differently because of it.
Which we've had occur. Mr. Fitzgerald?
I have to agree, actually, with George and Christy and others. My experience is at a retreat, you're able to actually have conversations with one another on a more personal level, and you're talking to one another instead of talking to a camera. So I think it's very worthwhile for us to have it somewhere else, and I think the Senior Center was a great place to have it.
You can create that informal atmosphere. You'd be surprised how a piece of pizza on the plate in front of you kind of makes you less formal. I mean, that's a mindset, and I don't think it just is set by surroundings, but that would be my thought.
Ms. Davis?
One thing I'd just be curious from the consultant point of view of like what they've experienced before, other group, municipalities and how they might handle their study sessions, and I'd just be, or if they do retreats and stuff, how that's handled. I'd just be, that might help guide us as well.
I think what I'm hearing is that we probably need to spend a significant amount of time on looking at our goals and coming to some consensus and creating an strategic action plan. I think that's probably maybe a direction that we need to spend most of our time on. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes.
Okay.
Just a quick question.
Yes.
The facilitators, is that someone that is familiar with Wheat Ridge and what we're dealing with here, or is this an outside facilitator? And have you used one before?
Oh yeah, we've always had a facilitator for our retreats and different programs that we put on. But we've used numerous ones, and we had a facilitator that we kept for numerous years, so there was some consistency with the documentation that was provided, and the which made it very transparent because we always came out with a work product at the end. A lot of facilitators sometimes just facilitate, and they expect us to create the work product. So, the facilitators are all very skilled in creating these types of plans. There's some that have a lot of government experience. They may not know everything about Wheat Ridge, but they know government experience. They worked with many different city councils. I think the facilitator that we were attempting to use the last go-around, has worked with Arvada and Lakewood and Boulder, so very familiar with the process, and just talking to these people, they, we think we're pretty unique, but every city's almost the same with the challenges that they're dealing with, and so I don't think we've ever had anybody that was necessarily, I don't know if we had anybody that was local that we've used. I'm not sure if we have or not, but most of them are, we've had some from out of state. The last several years, they've all been local Denver metro area people, so they know about Wheat Ridge. Yeah.
I was going to say, we're done, but go ahead.
I just, George, did you have other topics that you thought should be discussed or should be on the agenda?
No, not specifically. I think we can take those offline and kind of build it. I think obviously, I suppose what I stated earlier was that I think between the vision and goals and the objectives that we've talked about, as well as the looking at the NRS, to me that covers a broad swath of things. And if there's something specific, I think we should just kind of you can provide me with some of those things, and we'll try to kind of put it out and start to shape it up over the next few weeks.
And
Mr. Urban.
as far as a meeting space or a venue, as much as I would like to retreat, I would actually prefer to get in the thick of it and sort of turn it around and not necessarily be a retreat, but to spring forward and to see if we can book a room, like a conference room at the American Motel or some other location. I'm not kidding. To put ourselves in a place where we can really see some of the situations that we need to be addressing in the city, and not to put any names on it, but any conference room of similar ilk would be just fine.
That's an interesting idea.
But it would give us an opportunity to really kind of. But we don't want to tell the police which conference room we're going to. That's the thing. We want them to be surprised. But I would just ask us to consider finding a location that would put us in the thick of it, as opposed to retreating into a safe space, so to speak, but putting ourselves in a place where we can really sort of be in the thick of it, so to speak.
Or we could include a tour of, if that was, just because what's important is that the thinking is there, the cooperation, everyone feeling safe and comfortable. So I understand your point, and yeah. Go ahead, Mr. Pond.
Just to wrap it up, we'll kind of take some notes from this, and also obviously some feedback from folks. I am hearing, I just want to confirm this though, that there probably is some things that we should do in study session format to advance ourselves forward, maybe even before the retreat, certainly after it, right? Okay, all right.
That's the only thing on our study session tonight, so we can move on to elected officials' reports right away. And this would be pertaining to committees you belong to or meetings you've gone to that you want to share with the group so that the knowledge is extended. Monica, do you have something you want to?
I don't at this time, thank you.
Ms. Hoppy?
No, thank you.
Mr. Pond?
Nothing tonight.
Ms. Davis?
So I have just a couple things. One of the things that I would like to request possibly, I had a catch up with Christie meeting last week, and thank you for all those who attended. And we had a really good discussion. I actually brought the budget book, and we talked about things. And one of the things we talked about was the Feed the Future backpack program. And I guess I kind of left last week a little worried about that, because I think from a budget perspective, when they presented the information to us with the citizens group and stuff, I think they had a little different numbers. The price went from, I think, $2.50 a backpack for the weekend for the family to $4.50. So I would like to ask council if we could reconsider looking at that, I think that, I think the nice thing about the committee and the group and how they set up and did the monies as far as some of the third-party requests, when you look at a lot of those are funds that are not as much a necessity. They're discretionary funds, if it be supporting a race or a project. And I think feeding the kids, and it was evident that they were kids in our community, is important. So I'd like to either discuss that at the budget meeting to see if we can add to make up that shortfall, or if council feels like they want to stay within that budget of that third party, that we look to see where we could maybe nip and tuck in a couple places to meet a necessity versus kind of discretionary fund. So that is one of my requests. The other update is there will be a Renewal Wheat Ridge meeting on December 6th for folks who want to mark their calendars for that.
Thank you. Mr. Fitzgerald?
Nothing tonight.
Thank you, not tonight.
I just wanted to let people know that there was a wonderful event last Friday at Wheat Ridge High School. Ed Perlmutter helped organize a NASA uplink to the International Space Station. So right over here at Wheat Ridge High School, we had students able to connect to the International Space Station, and they got to talk to an astronaut and ask questions. It was a wonderful event. It was really unique to Wheat Ridge and actually to Jefferson County. And thank you very much to Ed Perlmutter for helping set that up. And I think it's a great example of the really unique things that our schools are trying to do and trying to bring to the city and bring to our local education. So thank you to Wheat Ridge High School, and thank you to Ed Perlmutter for helping set that up.
Thank you for bringing that up. The one thing I would like to bring up is that possibly, between staff and council, I'm not sure who else involved with it, Local Works, with the passing of 2E and knowing that Wadsworth Boulevard is going to be really opportunity there for changes and evolvement, really. I'd like to see the city and kind of be able to present to each one of those property owners what's available to them. Not only that, that their building is going to be changed, but that we have grants, we have loans available, we have S packages, et cetera. And this would be a time to renew and revive. And I think that I would like to see us approach that in such a way that the most advantage will come from it. That this is going to happen. These are the possibilities available for your building or your choices, or if you're going to be moved, et cetera. And I know we offer that sort of thing, but I would love to really see some strong emphasis on it so that we end up at the end with a beautiful street, a beautiful passageway through our city. So, you're looking at me like you understand what I don't understand. Nope. If there's nothing else, then let's close the study session. I'm sorry. Oh, I'm so sorry. Janelle?
Yeah, I actually have something I could report on. I attended a Colorado Association of Community Corrections Boards conference on Friday. It was down in Lone Tree, and we have those conferences once a quarter. Really some good speakers, and one of the focuses was reentry. We had a good presentation by a fellow named Hassan Latif, who spent 18 years in prison for armed robbery, and he is out, and he was was pardoned by Ritter, but he actually talked about his transition from spending about 12 years in prison trying to get out, and how he came to the realization that he was there because it was his own fault, and the change that happened with him. And now he runs a reentry office of sorts, I guess you'd say. It's out at 16th and Dayton on East Colfax, and it's a place where former formerly incarcerated folks can go, and he said we're like Switzerland. The ones that were folks who would normally on the outside of that building would be probably trying to kill each other. When they come in there, everything gets left at the door, and gang members and so on, and they have to work together. They have computer stations for them. They have weightlifting, and just try to help folks never go back to prison. And he was a really motivating speaker. And then also the county, the Jefferson County Corrections Board has been working on, there's a subcommittee of our corrections board that has been working to redo the procedures and policies. And we had to make some changes because we were getting to the point where we were having over 30 cases a month to screen by the full board, and the meetings were just taking too long, and we couldn't get it all done. And we've revamped a little bit the criteria for mandatory screening, so it's the last 2 months have reduced the amount of cases that we have to screen, so that's good. And we have one more meeting yet with procedures and policies of the board to get that all finished. But those corrections meetings are 7 a.m. meetings, so be glad you're not on that committee. But so and I've signed up for 3 Thursday noon screenings for next year already, and I don't know, maybe you don't even know, I'm vice president of the Colorado Association of Community Corrections Boards, and we've been having some extra meetings to talk about the same thing, mission and vision and goals of community corrections, the Community Corrections Board in Colorado, and how we can help the various judicial districts, help them with education and just being better board members. There's a big push to have evidence-based practices as part of a tool for screening, so that it's not so whimsical and so emotional when you vote yes or no on somebody, that it's a little more cut and dried, and you go by statistics and scoring and criminal history and various scores that they have on different evaluation tools. And surprisingly, you can just about predict if somebody is going to be successful in community corrections or not. So anyway, I'll stop talking now.
Thank you, Janelle, for that community work you're doing. Mr. DiTullio, Treasurer DiTullio?
Thank you. In the first quarter of the 2016, you passed the changes to the audit hearing process of the city of Wheat Ridge. And at that time, you asked for any updates on any audit hearings. As of today, we haven't had any audit hearings whatsoever. So everybody who has been audited has either paid their full audit amount. And I just wanted to let you know that about 2 weeks ago, I sent you an email, but I wanted the public noted too that we had an audit, and that company paid $146,000 approximately in that audit, and it was a use tax audit. So that money has been deposited into the coffers of the city of Wheat Ridge. So actually, that 146 came in about 2 weeks ago, and there hasn't been any audits whatsoever this year with the treasurer and the staff and the city attorney's office.
Is that with the help with the new auditor we hired, or is that?
I think it's vindictive of the economy that when a business gets audited, that they're able to pay, and when the city shows them where they've made a mistake on a sales tax or a use tax audit, that they paid. So,
Thank you. Certainly, Larry.
it just comes to my mind, that's kind of like a windfall, if you will. It certainly wasn't a budgeted revenue, I don't think. Where does that money go when we get an unexpected $146,000?
It goes to the mayor.
It goes to the general fund.
We actually do project about $450,000 a year in audit revenues. So we're under that still for this year. We did get another $10,000, I think, this last week. So we'll be close to 450, I think, for this year. So
Thank you.
yes.
Darn. Okay, I think we can close our council session, our study session, and move on to our business meeting. Is everybody comfortable with just going forward?
You don't have to get up and leave, but just let me close the tape up and open a new one.
Now we got to pledge allegiance and all that. Yeah, we have to do the pledge of allegiance.
George, if we need to do 2 days or whatever for the retreat,
Oh, yeah, I'm not going. No.
I'm fine, just if we have enough notice, that's all,
Yeah, we'll figure it.
you know, so if it's like, in fact, I'd rather do on Friday than Friday night, you know.
Well, I would be on Saturday night. We're going to be at the American Hotel. All the action is on that.
My dad's told me ever since I was this big, I can't go to those places, so. That and,
Okay, you can call it to order now.
Club Corner, there's 2 places I've been told never to venture.
How,
In the American Hotel,
What?
we can walk to that bar that's just the east, the one with the fenced yard out there. Right in the,
what is bothering her?
there's a bar right
Where's the
along,
American Motel?
it's on the north side of I-7 on Kipling. I guess we could.
Oh, I know they're all names, I just don't know which name's which.
Ah. Wow, we've lit up the flag, and let's stand up and salute it. All right.
Call the meeting to order.
I gotta call the meeting. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Please call the roll.
Monica Duran,
Here?
Zachary Taylor,
President.
Janice Hoppy,
Present.
Christy Davis, Tim Fitzgerald, George Pond, Larry Matthews,
Here?
Genevieve Wooden.
Present.
Madam Mayor, we have a quorum.
Thank you. Once again, we offer citizens' right to speak. Could I get someone to run down there? Yeah,
Don't all fall over
yeah,
each other.
yeah. You want to be a citizen who speaks?
No, I just wanted to acknowledge that we have an ex-president here, Zachary Taylor, sitting at instead of Zachary Urban.
Did anybody catch that?
I caught it. Yeah. Did you not?
Yeah.
There's no,
We have to call you Mr. President or Sir?
I think it voids everything we're about to do. But,
any changes to the agenda tonight? None? All right, let's go forward. This is, right, exactly. Council Bill number 252016. Ms. Hoppy, do you want to read that for us?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Council Bill number 25, 2016, amending Articles 1, 3, 6 of Chapter 26 of the Wheat Ridge Code of Laws concerning the implementation of a residential bulk plan development standard, case number ZOA-16-06.
Please go ahead and read the issue, since it's mostly for the public.
This ordinance amends the development standard for the residential 1C, R1C zone district, and one-family dwellings in the residential 3, R3 zone district to add a bulk plan regulation. The purpose of this proposed ordinance is to reduce the mass and scale of new development in Wheat Ridge's smallest lot, single-family zone districts. Currently, there are no development standards for the aforementioned zone districts which limit mass and scale other than the existing 35-foot height maximum in effect for all residential zone districts. The ordinance is also intended to preserve the ability to obtain a reasonable development and reinvestment potential for private property.
Thank you. This is a public hearing, which I do need to open. And may we have a report? Do we need an ordinance?
Ordinance number, yes, this will be ordinance number 1613.
Mr. Johnston, please.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, Mayor and Council. Ken Johnston, Wheat Ridge Community Development. We are here this evening for the public hearing on the ordinance that we've been talking about for the past several months, which, as Ms. Hoppy stated, would introduce new requirements into our residential 1C and R3 zone districts that would add what are called bulk plan standards. And we've been there before, but we'll do a little 101 as to what exactly those are. But first, a little bit of background in terms of when this started. At a staff level, we initiated research back in the spring of this year, in part in response to some inquiries or concerns that we'd been receiving feedback from the community in terms of the scale or the impact of some of the infill development that we've been seeing around Wheat Ridge, which is a good thing, but also needs to be balanced with how it impacts established neighborhoods. So we thought it appropriate to survey some of our adjacent jurisdictions for comparison's sake to see where we stood on some specific residential development standards. We looked specifically at 3 areas: building height. Wheat Ridge has a maximum building height of 35 feet in all of our residential zone districts. The research that we concluded was that that's fairly similar to most of our surrounding jurisdictions, those being Edgewater, Lakewood, West Denver, and Arvada were the other jurisdictions that we surveyed. We also looked at building setbacks. So what is the required minimum building setback for structures from perimeter property lines, front, rear, and side property lines? And that too, with very minor exceptions, we appeared to be very similar in terms of what setbacks we were having for comparison's sake. One topic that came up that we knew we wanted to look at, but we didn't have that regulatory environment in place in Wheat Ridge at the time, was standards regarding bulk plan regulations. And what we found out was, lo and behold, we didn't have those and haven't had those in place, but all of those other jurisdictions did in one form or fashion. And we'll go over a little bit more what those are. So we briefed City Council and the Planning Commission over the course of the summer months, generally July, and got your feedback. The direction from City Council was to keep moving forward with the bulk plan research and code drafting. So just a little more in terms of then the dates moving forward after we received that direction. On August 22nd, City Council, again, with some, I think, concern for maybe the impacts of some of the development that had been occurring in established single-family neighborhoods, felt that it was appropriate to adopt by emergency ordinance a bulk plan definition and regulations in a fairly simple format. And that, because it was adopted by emergency and was effective immediately upon introduction and passage by City Council, by charter, that limits the effectiveness of that ordinance to a maximum of 90 days. So fast forward to today, and that's actually the day that that ordinance expires. So we haven't talked to the city attorney who's not here tonight, but either close of business or end of midnight. So will be off the books come first thing tomorrow morning. And at that same time, on August 22nd, the direction from council was to keep moving forward with a permanent bulk plan regulation as well. So the schedule since then, we've had further planning commission discussion and city council study session. We had a planning commission make a recommendation on a draft ordinance back on October 20th. Talk a little bit about that in a few moments in terms of what their direction was. On October 24th, City Council had a first reading on this ordinance. That motion on first reading to introduce it actually failed. And subsequent to that, on November 14th, last week, City Council passed a motion to reconsider the ordinance, as is allowed by council rules and city code, and voted to reconsider it, and then ultimately passed a motion to pass it on first reading and set the public hearing for this evening, which met the required minimum public noticing requirements to conduct this public hearing this evening. From a policy perspective, I think what we've been looking at, as been discussed tonight in part, we look at Envision Wheat Ridge, which is the city's comprehensive plan. That's a document that certainly encourages a lot of revitalization, in particular on our commercial corridors. It very much equally respects our established neighborhoods and wants to maintain and enhance the quality of those neighbors, while at the same time calls for increased housing options and encouraging people to be able to reasonably reinvest in these established neighborhoods. The neighborhood revitalization strategy, similarly, but perhaps even more progressively or proactively, encourages the community to create ways for reinvestment to occur. And it recognizes very much so that the community does have an aging housing stock that would be, worthy, and certainly we've seen that over the past many, many years, but worthy of seeing reinvestment in. So overall, our approach, and I think council's approach generally as well, has been to try and strike a balance between those two things, right, of maintaining established neighborhoods and respecting established character areas, but encouraging reinvestment. And we hope, or we've certainly endeavored to draft a regulatory environment regarding bulk planning that we think achieves that balance. So a few kind of terms of art to go over. We generally refer to something like a building envelope, which is basically the footprint within which you can build, generally controlled by minimum setbacks. So if we're looking at kind of a section view from a front of a lot, we're showing the two minimum setbacks, which in the zoning districts that we're speaking of this evening is 5 feet. So historically, that's what's defined really the building envelope, is the setback requirements, front, rear, and sides. The bulk plane is a different type of regulatory environment that typically is measured from what's called the base plane, which is, we'll go into that in a little more detail later as well, but it's basically the grade of the lot. And you start at a property line at the grade of the lot, and you measure up a certain distance, and we'll talk about what the options were for different distances. And then from there, you measure over on this bulk plane line which is typically, and that's the case in our draft ordinance, 45 degrees. So what it effectively does is, for these potentially higher stories, as you're getting up closer to that maximum 35-foot building height, it restricts some of the ability to build taller stories closer to the property line. And again, we'll look at some graphics that depict that a little more. So that's kind of the new jargon around this issue of bulk plane. A few assumptions that we've used in terms of doing our analysis of what the developability or buildability of lots will be if City Council adopts these bulk plane regulations. So this graphic attempts to depict that. So we've assumed 11 feet per story, which is fairly generous. It basically would allow about 10 feet of clear height on a story and one foot or so of structure. We're showing again that 5-foot setback. That's the minimum setback in both R1C and R3. And then that 22-foot story showing a 2-story house with a pitched roof is really, it's kind of the benchmark that we've used to say it seems like it's probably reasonable to ensure that it's possible to build a 2-story house. If you're going up to that 35 feet, you're generally looking probably more at a 3-story house, which certainly has some more impacts and maybe isn't as common, certainly, in most portions of Wheat Ridge. So we looked at a few different distances as to what that measurement of the bulk plane should be. And I'll go through some graphics of those so you can just kind of see anecdotally, not real scientifically here, but just, I mean, these are real dimensions, it's dimension drawing, but how that would impact. So 10 feet, which we did see in some of our neighboring jurisdictions as a measurement, at least for parts of their communities, you can start to see, what that impact would be on that second story. Similarly, 12 feet, not as much impact, of course, but still definitely impacting the ability to do a second story that's built right at that 5-foot minimum setback. So just eyeballing it, it looks like you'd probably be more at about 9 feet of the minimum setback if you wanted to go to 2 stories with the 12-foot bulk plane. We looked at even higher bulk planes because some of the jurisdictions had these higher ones, and what that suggested that you could build this 2-story, 22-foot hall structure right at that 5-foot minimum setback. So knowing that parts of Wheat Ridge and certainly parts of the Wheat Ridge that we're talking about this evening in the R1C and R3 zone districts, you'd be allowed to build that 2-story structure right at that 5-foot minimum setback. So going back just a little bit more, we've looked at this 15-foot measurement, which is what's in the draft ordinance, and you can see again just spitballing it, but you're going to push that 2-story construction to about 7 feet back from the perimeter property line. And then this shows kind of how that looks for a 3-story structure. So if you look at that number that I just mentioned there, 7 feet, that's where you're kind of by right generally can do 2 stories. And then, you're pushed back to more like 17 feet if you want to do that full 3-story construction in terms of what your setback would be from your perimeter property lines. And again, keeping in mind that these assumptions, in my opinion, are generous. I mean, there's other ways to tweak this. I mean, you don't necessarily have to have 10-foot ceilings on every floor, particularly on upper floors. I think it would not be uncommon to have more like 8 or 8.5. So there's ways to kind of reduce that number if you want to make some modifications in terms of your heights and your ceilings. This is a map that depicts the zoning districts in question as well as all the zoning districts in the city. You have a smaller graphic that's maybe a little easier to read in your packet that drills down more specifically into 2 areas and just shows the 2 zone districts in question. So we're looking at R1C and R3. So R1C is kind of the fuchsia, is that a reasonable call? And then the kind of the mustard or the brownish color is the R3. So you can see they're predominantly on this side of town, but they do occur throughout the community, and as drafted, it would apply throughout the community wherever property is zoned R1C or R3. We would note that I think a lot of the reinvestment that we're seeing in R1C is occurring in R1C. R1C is our smallest lot single-family zoning, so you can have 6,000 square foot minimum lot sizes and 50-foot minimum lot widths, and a lot of the lots are actually in those dimensions. So there are some fairly small single-family lots. Similarly, in R3, which also occurs generally in the same part of town, a lot of it in East Wheat Ridge, there are many lots that don't meet the minimum size that would be necessary to do multifamily, because R3 allows single-family duplexes and multifamily, but they still would be allowed as a use by right, regardless of lot size, to do single-family homes. So there's the same potential for reinvestment and scraping and rebuilding on the R3 lots with, if they're not big enough, with single-family homes. So that was the rationale behind those 2 zone districts. This is a little bit of analysis, again, of what it means to define the base plane. So this is looking at it for a sloped lot, because I think we want to be clear that the bulk plane regulations are more impactful on sloped lots for a variety of reasons. So this depicts existing grade. Roughly, this would then be the base plane measurement with that definition that we provided, which would be basically the average of the midpoint of grade on the 4 property lines. So this is a little bit of a simplification in that we're showing 2 property lines here, but we'd actually be taking that measurement based on the elevation at the midpoint of the property line for each of the 4 property lines, and that defines base plane. And then measuring up, you can see how that 15 feet would then apply, applying that same methodology in terms of the construction techniques that we were discussing. You can see that that two-story construction on a sloped lot, which this is about 4 or 5 feet of slope on this lot, is what is being depicted. And it's would have more impact, right? We're showing that that would have an 11-foot effective side yard setback. And I think that's obviously has an impact that should be considered by council. I think it's in part kind of by design, because I think you can, as you look at grade, as you're on this property line and you're transitioning over to the neighboring property here, the kind of perceived mass and bulk of the building on this side of the lot, in fact, is feeling more like a 2.5 story. So I think that's kind of by design why the bulk plane is a little more restrictive on sloping lots, because the practical impact is more impactful. I would also point out that because of the slope of the lot, on these sloped lots on the downside, you do get an opportunity to potentially have more of a finished basement if, all other factors align, because you're having a lot more daylight. If you've got 6 or 7 feet here and you can, have that space on that lower level feel more like upper level space in terms of light and air. And then the last slide in terms of graphics of what the impact of this is just kind of depicting what the buildable remaining area would be for those sloped lots with those 11-foot setbacks, and assuming that we're on those narrower lots, those common 50-foot lots. You still have about 2,800 square feet of buildable area, and this graphic is not intended to suggest that someone would find it efficient to build a structure in that shape, but it just shows you that you could potentially have a main house on the front portion of the lot that would have that 28 feet in width, perhaps an alley-loaded garages, since there are lots of alleys that are available in East Wheat Ridge. And of course, you can multiply that 2,800 square feet of buildable area by 2 and 2.5 stories, whatever the number might be. I mentioned earlier that the Planning Commission has taken action as required for any amendment to Chapter 26. They held their public hearing on October 20th, and they do forward a recommendation of denial. We've talked with Planning Commission on a number of occasions over the past several months, as we have you, and I think they've been fairly consistent that they would like to have an even bigger discussion beyond just bulk plane. They'd like to talk about whether that 35-foot building height across the city is the right number. They'd like to talk about, whether we should be looking at specific regulations for different neighborhood character areas. And some members of the Planning Commission have mentioned that they are somewhat interested in looking at adopting, some level of prescriptive residential design standards. Those are all, I think, very legitimate things to talk about. I think from staff perspective, they're also much more significant conversations in terms of what would be necessary in terms of public process and resources to really tackle those in a substantive way that would be a meaningful conversation. So they forward their recommendation of denial, speaking not too much on their behalf, but for those reasons, that they thought that bulk plane was not a sufficient regulatory change, that they wanted to look more comprehensively. And with that, I'm available for questions, and obviously we want to have a public hearing.
Council, would you like to ask Mr. Johnston about any questions you have? Mr. Wren.
So can you confirm for me, if this ordinance has passed this evening, it would go into effect at midnight
Upon
tonight?
adoption, it would go effective.
Upon adoption, it would be in effect at midnight?
Correct.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Or 8 something. All right, do we have someone that wants to speak? Thank you. Okay, if there's no questions of staff at this time, the public is now welcome to speak. Dorothy Archer, followed by Eric Jacobson.
Good evening, Mayor, Council, staff, and citizens. I'm here again to request your focus on Chapter 26, remain positive for incorporating a 15-foot bulk plane to the existing building plan, keeping in mind home value to the existing citizens, and not creating a need for low-income housing. Also, keeping in mind the existing architectural design, keeping Wheat Ridge the much sought-after, small town that we're known for, and also the profound community feeling that exists now. Thank you.
Thank you. Eric? Eric, could you please give your address too? I failed to ask
Eric
Dorothy.
Jacobson, 2929 Chase Street. And I just wanted to thank Mayor and Council and the staff for acting so quickly and listening to the citizens. And I just wanted to also throw my support behind 25206 too, because you know, we just think that this would be a good, I mean, it's right along in line with the municipalities around us, and I think that in the long run it's going to help improve relationships among citizens in our neighborhoods too. As it kind of tones down some of the imposing nature of the structures that are kind of causing a bit of divide, to say the least, in some of the communities around us. So, thank you.
Thank you. I don't believe there's anyone else more to speak. With that, I'm going to close the public hearing, and I'm looking for a motion.
I move to approve Council Bill number 25-2016, an ordinance amending Articles 1, 2, and 6 of Chapter 26 of the Wheat Ridge Code of Laws concerning the implementation of residential bulk plane development standards on second reading, and that it take effect immediately upon adoption and signature by the mayor.
Second?
Seconded by Ms. Duran. Any other discussion? Please cast your votes. Oh, wait, we do have discussion. Mr. Fitzgerald.
You've all heard this many times before, but I'm going to vote no because I think the base plane measurement unfairly disadvantages people who live on sloped lots, and I'd like to see a different base plane measurement. So that's all I want to say.
Okay. Go ahead and cast your votes.
Motion carries 7-1 with Councilmember Fitzgerald voting no.
That's all we have for the meeting tonight, and I'm going to close.